There are neighbors living just a few feet away, right now, whose actions prove that true horror often resides not in the shadows, but in the mundane, in the smiling face next door. These aren't tales of monsters, but of ordinary people whose thin veneer of civility cracked, revealing something truly chilling. Consider the story of a young couple new to their quiet suburban street. Their next-door neighbor, a man in his late 50s, was incredibly friendly, almost too friendly. He'd offer to help with anything, from yard work to fixing a leaky faucet. It felt like a blessing, a real community. Then, small things started to happen. Their mail was sometimes opened, items in their garage would subtly shift position. They dismissed it as their own forgetfulness, or perhaps the wind. Until one evening, the wife was in her living room alone, reading. The window was open, a light breeze drifting in. She felt a distinct chill, a breath on the back of her neck, and in the reflection of the dark window, she saw a figure pressed against the glass just outside. It was their friendly neighbor, watching her, perfectly still. He vanished the moment she screamed, melting back into the shadows as if he'd never been there. The police found nothing, no footprints, no evidence. But the warmth of their welcome had turned to ice, and the feeling of safety evaporated, replaced by a constant, sickening awareness of what might be lurking just beyond their sight. What kind of person watches someone in their own home just for the sake of watching? Then there's the tale from a sleepy rural town where a woman, Sarah, inherited her grandmother's old farmhouse. It was isolated, peaceful, exactly what she needed. Her only immediate neighbor was an elderly man named Arthur who lived across the fields, mostly keeping to himself. Sarah would occasionally see him tending his garden, a solitary, almost picturesque figure. One sweltering summer, Sarah noticed a foul odor permeating the air, growing stronger each day. It wasn't the usual farm smell, this was something else, something cloying and sickly sweet. She tried to ignore it, attributing it to a dead animal, but the stench grew unbearable, reaching her bedroom at night, making her stomach churn. Days turned into a week, and the smell was now an oppressive cloud. Concerned, she called the local sheriff. What they found in Arthur's barn was beyond grotesque. Dozens of mutilated animals, preserved in a macabre collection, some clearly pets from surrounding farms, including her own cat that had vanished weeks prior. Arthur himself was found sitting on his porch, calmly whittling wood, seemingly oblivious to the horror just meters away. He simply smiled, a vacant, unsettling smile when questioned. He'd been collecting, he said, for scientific purposes. The true terror wasn't just the discovery, but realizing how long he'd lived there, unseen, unheard, cultivating his secret, horrific hobby right under everyone's noses. Or imagine Mark, a young professional living in a modern apartment complex. His upstairs neighbor, a seemingly quiet woman named Karen, seemed pleasant enough. Until the noise started. Not loud parties, but a relentless, rhythmic thudding, sometimes late at night, sometimes early morning. It wasn't music, it wasn't footsteps. It sounded like something being dragged across the floor, then dropped repeatedly. Mark tried knocking, leaving notes, even contacting the building management. Nothing changed. The thudding continued, a maddening, unexplained rhythm that burrowed into his brain, disrupting his sleep, his work, his peace. He began to feel truly paranoid, imagining the worst. Was she moving furniture every night? Was it some strange exercise? One afternoon, after weeks of this torment, the building manager finally coerced Karen into letting them inspect her apartment while Mark waited nervously in the hallway. What they found wasn't a source of noise, but an almost empty apartment, save for a single, small, perfectly normal-looking rocking chair in the middle of the living room, surrounded by a faint, circular worn patch on the carpet. Nothing to explain the thudding, nothing at all. Yet the sound had been undeniable, a constant physical presence. The manager shrugged, attributing it to old pipes or structural quirks, but Mark knew. He'd heard it, and from that day on, the thudding stopped completely. He never saw Karen again. Did she simply move, or did the silence itself hide a far more disturbing truth? Consider the unsettling case of the family whose house bordered a dense, overgrown forest. Their new neighbors, a family of 4, moved in next door, quiet and unassuming. The only oddity was their insistence on keeping their yard wild, letting the trees and bushes grow unchecked, creating a natural wall between the properties. The children, a boy and a girl, were rarely seen playing outside. One day, the family's young daughter, playing near the property line, swore she saw a pair of eyes staring at her from the thickest part of the neighbor's overgrown yard. Not animal eyes, she insisted, but human eyes, wide and unblinking. Her parents dismissed it as imagination. But then, a few days later, while gardening, the father saw it too. A face, pale and gaunt, peering through a gap in the dense foliage, utterly still. It disappeared instantly when he cried out. The police were called, but found nothing but tangled wilderness. Yet the family continued to report brief, unsettling glimpses, a shadow at an upstairs window, the sound of movement in the dense underground late at night. They never once spoke to their neighbors about it, afraid of confronting the unnerving presence. What was more terrifying, the possibility of a stranger hiding in the woods, or the thought that it was one of the quiet, unseen residents from next door, watching them in silence through the overgrown darkness? These aren't isolated incidents. They are chilling reminders that the stranger isn't always someone you don't know at all. Sometimes the most unsettling threats live just across the fence, behind the trimmed hedges, in the house whose lights flicker on and off at odd hours. The true horror isn't just what these people did, but the realization that they were, in every superficial sense, just like everyone else, normal. And that's what makes locking your doors feel not like paranoia, but a primal, necessary act.